This program has been produced by Detroit Labor History Tours. Funding for this program is provided in part by Wayne State University's College of Urban, Labor, and Metropolitan Affairs, a center of interdisciplinary research and teaching on urban workplace issues, and the Michigan Council for the Humanities, encouraging exploration of our histories, values, ideas, words, and dreams through public humanities programs, and the Michigan Council for the Arts, a state agency making high-quality art available to the citizens of Michigan and the viewers of WTVS, Detroit Public Television.
The murals were painted shortly after my grandparents arrived here in the U.S. from Mexico. And my grandfather had been one of the many people who had been recruited to work for $5 a day at Ford. When I was really small, my grandfather used to come every Sunday to the house and pick us up. And sometimes my sisters and brother wouldn't want to go, and I would always go with my grandfather because I didn't want to say no to him. But we would come down here and we would say, "We're going to church now." And then here we would come to the DIA. And he would show us around the different parts of the murals.
Probably the most distinctive thing that I've noticed is the facial expressions. Everybody has almost a blank look. No one seems to be happy, they're not smiling. Of course, during that time, they were not allowed to talk or smile.
The first time I saw the murals was when we came down on a grade school visit to the Art Institute. My first impressions were probably one of awe. I mean, they're quite huge. You can't help but notice the faces. I think there's a lot of emotion. I'd have to say it was idealistic.
When this was created back in the 30s, I believe this would have raised a lot of eyebrows because it really took people into the bowels of the plants to see exactly what really happened. I think this is more of a realistic portrait of what was going on in the Rouge in the 30s.
Realistic, yet beautiful. More than a half-century after the Mexican artist Diego Rivera painted these murals of factory labor, people find in them both the real and the ideal. How can this be? How can modern industry, a grim gray reality of power, brute force, even oppression, become also a thing of beauty? In these murals, Diego Rivera confronted the contradictions of our mechanical age. Drawing from Detroit's industrial reality, he created a unique vision of modern technology, its capacity to extend life and destroy it, to liberate workers and dominate them. The story begins with Edsel Ford, president of the Detroit Arts Commission and heir to the auto empire of his father, Henry Ford. In 1932, Edsel and Dr. William Valentiner, director of the Detroit Institute of Arts, invited Diego Rivera to paint the walls of the museum's garden court. They chose a man devoted to the high ideals of art and liberation, but also a man immersed in the harsh realities of Mexico's revolution. Born in 1886 to a family made prosperous by silver mining, Rivera escaped the grinding poverty that shadowed Mexico's people. But the democratic ideals of his schoolteacher parents nourished in Diego a spirit of rebellion. After revolutionaries overthrew the Mexican dictatorship in 1911 and civil war followed, he joined those advocating a complete social revolution. At the same time, Rivera also knew the world of high art and aristocratic taste. Trained in Europe, he mastered the modern styles of canvas painting and the traditional techniques of wall frescoes. While studying in France, He and others of his generation also witnessed the mechanized slaughter of World War I. In the midst of this carnage, the Russian Revolution toppled the Tsar and created a new workers' state. Rivera saw in the 1917 uprising a model for his own impoverished land. In 1921, he returned home to paint wall murals for Mexico's new government and soon became a leader of the Mexican Communist Party, which supported the new regime. He abandoned the aristocratic themes of his early training to paint instead public images from Mexican history and class struggle. Yet his work put him at odds with the Communist Party when it broke with the regime and called on Rivera to sever his government ties. Rivera refused, and in 1929 the party expelled him. Rivera soon after left for the United States, arriving in Detroit in 1932 to begin work on his murals. Here, as he contemplated the walls of the museum courtyard, Rivera had to answer the most basic question: what to paint? The museum asked only that the murals portray themes from Michigan's history. A traditional artist might have painted famous men and events, not Rivera. Instead, he focused on the region's heavy industry. Many artists scorned mass production, but Rivera saw industry as salvation for his poverty-stricken land. He considered engineers and architects America's greatest artists. He visited Detroit area factories in the spring of 1932 to sketch ideas. By July, he was ready to paint. In keeping with the traditions of Italian fresco painting, Rivera's Detroit murals would include the patrons who commissioned his work, Edsel Ford and Dr. Valentiner. But Rivera placed these men in a perspective dominated by factory labor, by the machines these workers set in motion, and the earthbound minerals they fashioned into steel. Human labor, not captains of industry, would dominate Rivera's vision of productive power. Steve Davis, then a teenage assistant to the artist, watched Rivera enlarge the human scale.
He was making all these corrections to try to expand and make bigger, more impressive the forms, particularly of the worker, the people. He wanted them to appear solid, monumental.
Rivera painted daily, stopping only to talk with a growing stream of visitors. Stephen Dimitrov was one of the assistants who prepared the wet plaster walls for painting.
He did discuss politics with many people who came, and we, the assistants, were furious because here's a wall ready to be painted. And here we're discussing politics with some guy, usually in Spanish or French or Russian, and the wall is drying. And we were furious because if this wall has to be taken down, we have to take it down. We have to be plastered. This is a job, you know.
Shelton Taps, a Ford foundry worker who heard of Rivera's work, came to see the artist as he painted.
We had slipped into the museum, into this part where he was already at work. He had done some of the preliminary sketching, and he'd come down for a break, but he had a piece of cheese, a piece of bread, and whatever was in this bottle. He said that what those hands represented was that the minerals and products of the earth were there for man to take from the earth and fashion to his benefit.
The reality of mass production seemed to overwhelm nature and humankind, yet Rivera projected a contrasting ideal. His image of industry, springing from nature, emphasized humanity's dependence on the earth and the potential unity in labor of the four races: black, holding coal; white, holding limestone; Asian, holding sand; and Indian, holding ore, each an ingredient in the making and casting of steel. Rivera captured the contradictory potentials in this age of steel machinery. Science and industry could produce life-saving medicine or poison gas, industrial automation or military hardware, civilian airplanes or bombers. And for good or ill, mechanized work dominated factory life. It also dominates Rivera's mural. To portray this new reality of mass production, he drew images from the world's biggest industrial plant, the Ford Rouge complex in nearby Dearborn. Completed only 5 years before Rivera came to Detroit, this was the only manufacturing complex in the world where raw materials brought by ship and train to one end of the plant emerged from the other end as finished automobiles. Spread over a square mile along the Rouge River were 93 buildings, 53,000 machine tools, and 27 miles of conveyor belts. At peak production, 100,000 workers toiled here. Rivera was enthralled with the Rouge plant, but he planned no mere industrial landscape for his mural. Instead, he would paint a utopian vision of productive power. Utopian indeed, for as Rivera painted, the Great Depression had stilled Detroit's industry. 2/3 of the Rouge workforce was unemployed in 1932. Yet Rivera painted a factory bustling with activity, a symbolic image of mass production. The line between the real and the ideal is hard to define, even for those who work there.
I believe that the murals show the conditions that the workers were employed in the Ford plants. It's such a realistic mural, and when you look at it, you kind of carried back to those days.
Walter Dorosh, a retired toolmaker from the Rouge, sees the reality he knew as a worker, but sees it purified by Rivera's hand.
While the murals are clear, during the actual operations, the air was quite different. It was full of dust, smoke.
Rivera cleared the air to reveal an underlying reality.
The murals really show a conglomerate of many scenes, all compressed into these two major murals here.
Compressed in a way that mirrored Henry Ford's innovative methods. Before the assembly line, skilled mechanics built cars with hand tools, producing custom-made and expensive automobiles. Ford replaced the tool-wielding craftsmen with machines and put workers shoulder to shoulder at the moving assembly line. Each now performed a single, repetitive task as conveyors brought parts to the line. Output soared, and the cost per car fell so dramatically that Ford could lower prices and raise wages, and still make huge profits. Some crafts simply disappeared as the new methods took over. Painters who once stroked hand brushes across the body found themselves replaced by modern technology, paint spraying guns. Rivera depicted the new generation of body painters isolated in the heat and gloom of mechanized labor. Once skilled workers built wooden body frames. But starting in the 1920s, the company switched from wood to steel. Rivera pictured the new mechanical presses that stamped out metal body parts like huge cookie cutters, looming over the workers who fed them sheet steel. Some trades grew with this new technology, especially those building and repairing the machines. But woodworkers and many other craftsmen lost their jobs, and those who remained saw their work transformed. Had Rivera painted Detroit's metal finishers just 10 years earlier, they would have used hand files and soldering irons to smooth the body panels. But as electric sanders replaced hand files, metal finishers found themselves enveloped in a haze of sparks, lead fumes, and dust.